I never imagined I'd be standing on the sidewalk with just 2 suitcases at 63 years old, watching my daughter close the door of the house I'd paid for. But life has a way of revealing truths in the most unexpected moments. Like when the lottery ticket tucked into my purse was worth $14. $7 million, and my own flesh and blood was telling me I wasn't welcome anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in Port Arbel. The coastal fog rolled in, blanketing our historic Victorian home in the Lighthouse District with its familiar gray embrace. I'd spent 37 years in this house, raising Jessalyn among these antique wood floors and stained glass windows, filling each room with the botanical illustrations that had once been my passion before I set it aside for motherhood. I remember staring at the small envelope from the Port Arbel Lottery Commission that had arrived in that morning's mail. I'd purchased the ticket months ago, on my birthday, a small gift to myself that I'd promptly forgotten about. When I opened it, the world seemed to pause. Confirmation of a winning ticket, with instructions to visit the Pinnacle Tower in Westholme to claim my prize. My hands trembled as I read the amount, $14. $7 million. After taxes, it would be close to $9 million. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was it. The answer to every worry that had been keeping me awake at night since Jessalyn and Rafferty had moved back in 6 months ago, claiming they needed to regroup after Rafferty's investment firm collapsed. I tucked the letter into my cardigan pocket, a secret warmth against my heart. I wouldn't tell them yet. I'd surprise them tonight with a celebration dinner, maybe even discuss the renovations Jessalyn had been pushing for. The ones I couldn't afford on my modest pension, from the Port Arbel Botanical Society. This money would change everything. But first, I needed to claim my winnings. I'd barely mentioned I was heading out when Jessalyn intercepted me at the door, her normally perfect blonde hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her expression tense. "Mom, we need to talk. Raf and I were discussing the living arrangements and we think it's time for some changes." Rafferty materialized from the kitchen, coffee cup in hand, his tailored shirt wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. He had that rehearsed smile I'd grown to recognize, the one that never reached his eyes. "Mirabelle," he said, using my first name as he always did. "You've been so generous letting us stay here while we get back on our feet." Something in his tone made me uneasy. I clutched my purse closer, feeling the letter inside. "This is my home, Rafferty. You're always welcome here." Jessalyn sat at the dining table, motioning for me to join them. "That's just it, Mom. Raf and I have been talking, and we feel it would be best if we took over the house entirely." "Took over?" I echoed, not comprehending. "We want to raise our family here," she continued, her voice taking on that persuasive tone she'd mastered as the admissions director at Thornfield Academy. "This place has so much potential, but it needs extensive updating, a modern touch, and 3 generations under one roof is complicated." "What exactly are you saying?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Rafferty cleared his throat. "We think you'd be happier in a retirement community. Serenity Gardens has some excellent options. We've already spoken with them." I stared at them, these strangers wearing my daughter's and son-in-law's faces. "You want me to move to a retirement home? I'm only 63. I'm not infirm or incapable." "Mother," Jessalyn sighed, using the formal address she reserved for when she was particularly exasperated with me. "Be reasonable. This house is far too large for you to maintain alone. The stairs are getting difficult for you." "I've never complained about the stairs," I interrupted. "And the property taxes are astronomical," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "We can help manage everything if you'll just let us take over." The letter in my pocket seemed to burn through the fabric. I could end this conversation right now by revealing my win. But something held me back. A disturbing realization that they'd been planning this for some time. "The house is in my name," I said quietly. I paid for it with the money from my illustrations for the Coastal Flora Encyclopedia. Rafferty leaned forward, all pretense of warmth gone. And you've reminded Jessalyn of that sacrifice for 20 years. Don't you think it's time you stopped holding it over her head? My breath caught. Every birthday, every Christmas, Jessalyn cut in. Always some reference to how you gave up your promising career to raise me. As if I asked to be born. The injustice of her words struck me like a physical blow. I'd mentioned my former work maybe 3 times in the past decade, and always with nostalgia, never resentment. That's not fair, I managed. What's not fair is expecting us to put our lives on hold because you can't adapt, Rafferty responded. Jessalyn has a position to maintain at Thornfield. We need to entertain, to present the right image. This house has potential, but not with doilies and faded watercolors everywhere. I felt the sting of tears but blinked them away. Those faded watercolors helped pay for your wedding, Jessalyn, and your graduate school, Rafferty. Jessalyn's eyes narrowed. And there it is again, the martyr routine. I stood up, needing space. I'm going out. We can discuss this later. Actually, Rafferty said, exchanging a glance with my daughter, we've already arranged everything. The movers will be here tomorrow. Tomorrow? I echoed, disbelieving. You expect me to pack up my entire life in a day? We've hired people to help, Jessalyn replied, her tone maddeningly reasonable. And Serenity Gardens has an opening in their assisted living wing. They can only hold it until tomorrow afternoon. Assisted living? I don't need assistance. Mom, you've been forgetting things. The stove was left on twice last month. You misplaced your medication. I've been distracted because you two have taken over every inch of my space. My routines are disrupted because Rafferty uses my studio for his home office, and you've rearranged my kitchen so many times I can't find anything. The doorbell rang, interrupting our argument. Jessalyn went to answer it, returning with Octavia. Harcourt, her closest friend since college and a prominent member of Thornfield Academy's board. Octavia! Jessalyn's entire demeanor changed, brightening artificially. Perfect timing. I was just showing Mom some brochures for Serenity Gardens. Octavia gave me a sympathetic look that made my skin crawl. Mirabelle, how are you holding? Up. Jessalyn told me about the difficult decision you're facing. My eyes darted to my daughter. What exactly did Jessalyn tell you? That you've been struggling with the house, Octavia said gently, as if speaking to a child. That you finally admitted it's become too much. It's so brave of you to recognize when it's time for a change. The realization hit me like ice water. They'd been telling people I wanted to leave. They were controlling the narrative, making it seem like this was my idea, my failing. I never said, I began, but Rafferty smoothly cut me off. We're still figuring out the details, he told Octavia. But we all agree change is necessary. I looked at the 3 of them, my daughter, her husband, her friend, all discussing my future as if I weren't even present. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The letter in my pocket felt like lead now, no longer a joyful secret but a test I hadn't known I was taking. And in that moment, I made a decision. I need some air, I announced, grabbing my coat. Mom, we're in the middle of something important, Jessalyn said, irritation creeping into her voice. And I need to think, I replied, walking toward the door. Unless you plan to physically restrain me? The flash of embarrassment on her face at Octavia's presence gave me my opening. I slipped out, hurrying down the street toward the harbor, my mind racing. By the time I reached the old lighthouse, I knew what I had to do. I called a taxi and headed straight to Pinnacle Tower in West Home. 3 hours later, I sat across from Linnea Creswell, the lottery claims officer, signing the final paperwork that would transfer $9 million into a newly created trust in my name. She was efficient and kind, arranging for a financial advisor to meet with me immediately after our appointment. "Congratulations again, Ms. Thornwick," she said, handing me a temporary debit card linked to an initial transfer of $250,000. "The full amount will be available within 48 hours. Is there anything else we can help you with today?" I hesitated, then asked, "Is there a way to keep this win private? I don't want public announcement." Linnea nodded. "In Port Arbel, lottery winners have the right to remain anonymous. Your name won't be published unless you choose to go public." Relief washed over me. "Thank you." On my way out, I caught sight of my reflection in the gleaming lobby windows. I looked exactly the same as I had this morning. Same silver-streaked, auburn hair, same sensible clothes, same face lined with decades of expressions. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. Instead of returning home immediately, I found myself at the offices of Valencia Moretti, one of Port Arbel's most respected attorneys. I hadn't planned this visit, but something told me it was necessary. Valencia listened intently as I explained my situation, her dark eyes sharp and evaluating. "Let me understand correctly," she said when I finished. "The house is solely in your name, purchased with your earnings. Your daughter and son-in-law moved in 6 months ago, claiming temporary hardship, and are now attempting to force you into assisted living so they can take over the property?" "Yes," I confirmed. "And they've already told friends that it was my idea that I'm struggling to manage." Valencia's expression hardened. "And today you discovered you've won a significant lottery prize, which you haven't disclosed to them." "That's right." She tapped her pen thoughtfully. "Ms. Thornwick, I don't typically advise clients to withhold financial information from family members, but in this case—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I believe you should secure your position before disclosing anything. They've demonstrated concerning behavior that suggests they might try to control your assets." By the time I left Valencia's office, I had a clear plan and the beginnings of legal protection for my newfound wealth. I felt lighter than I had in months, despite the heaviness of what awaited me at home. When I returned to the house, it was past dinner time. I found Jesselyn and Rafferty in the living room with 3 people I didn't recognize, all making notes and examining the furniture. "Who are these people?" I asked from the doorway. Jesselyn turned, her expression a mixture of irritation and forced patience. "The design team from Hargrove Interiors. We're getting estimates for the renovation." "In my house? Without consulting me?" Rafferty stepped forward. "Mirabelle, we discussed this. The decision has been made." "Not by me," I said quietly. "Mom," Jesselyn sighed, "we've already started the process. The deposit for Serenity Gardens is paid. The movers are coming tomorrow. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked around the room, at the strangers evaluating my possessions, at my daughter's impatient expression, at Rafferty's cold determination. This was the home where I'd raised my child alone after her father died, where I'd stayed up nights illustrating rare coastal plants to pay the mortgage, where every piece of furniture, every painting, every book had a memory attached to it. "Get out," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The designers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, a young woman with a portfolio, murmured something about coming back another time. "Mom," Jesselyn hissed, "stop embarrassing us." "I'm not talking to your designers," I clarified. "I'm talking to you and Rafferty. Get out of my house." Rafferty laughed, but it was strained. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied. "This is my home. My name is on the deed. I paid for it, maintained it, and filled it with love for decades. And I'm not leaving." Jesselyn's face flushed. "We've already made arrangements." "That you had no right to make," I cut her off. "I'm not infirm. I'm not incapable. And I'm not giving up my home because it doesn't fit your image as Thornfield's admissions director. This is ridiculous, Rafferty spat. You're acting like a child. And you're acting like thieves. I responded. I want you out by tomorrow. For a moment, they stood frozen, clearly not having anticipated this resistance. Then Jessalyn's expression hardened, becoming something ugly and unfamiliar. Fine, she said coldly. If that's how you want to play this. But don't come crying to us when you can't afford the property taxes or when the roof starts leaking again. Don't expect us to bail you out when your pension isn't enough. I'll manage, I said simply. Will you? Rafferty sneered. On your little botanical society pension? Don't be delusional, Mirabelle. You need us more than we need you. I almost told them then. Almost pulled out the letter and watched their faces change as they realized their mistake. But something held me back. If money was the only thing that would change their treatment of me, then nothing had really changed. At all. I think we're done here, I said instead. Jessalyn stared at me, her eyes suddenly calculating. The house isn't just yours, you know. Dad left his share to me in his will. This was a lie. My late husband had left everything to me, trusting me to provide for our daughter, which I had done unfailingly. But I could see Jessalyn believed her own fabrication. Check the deed, Jessalyn, I replied calmly. It's in my name alone. Always has been. We'll see about that, she threatened. If you force us out, we'll fight you legally. We've established residency. We have rights. Then I suggest you speak with an attorney, I said, moving aside from the doorway. Now please leave. Rafferty looked like he might argue further, but the designers were still present, witnessing everything, and his pride won out. This isn't over, he muttered as they walked out. After the designers left with hasty apologies, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the stillness of my home, truly mine again, at least in principle. But I knew Jessalyn and Rafferty weren't going to give up easily. I pulled out my phone and called Valencia Moretti again. They threatened legal action, I told her after explaining what had happened. They're claiming my daughter has rights to the property through her father. Valencia's response was immediate and reassuring. She doesn't. I've already pulled him. The property records. The house is solely in your name, and your husband's will left everything to you. They have no legal claim beyond tenancy rights, which can be addressed with proper eviction procedures. What should I do tonight? They're still here in the house. Document everything, Valencia advised. If they become threatening, call the police. I'll prepare the formal eviction notice tomorrow morning, but it will take at least 30 days to legally remove them if they resist. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, listening to Jessalyn and Rafferty moving around upstairs. They were staying for now, but the battle lines had been drawn. My phone buzzed with a text from Valencia. Consider alternative housing for yourself during this process. Conflicts can escalate quickly in shared spaces. I thought about my options. The $250,000 already in my account would easily secure temporary accommodations. But why should I leave my own home? Then again, staying under the same roof with people who'd tried to force me out seemed unwise. As I weighed my choices, heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Rafferty appeared in the doorway, his expression tight with controlled anger. "You're making a mistake," he said without preamble. "We were trying to help you." "By forcing me into assisted living against my will?" I asked. He crossed his arms. "You're not seeing the bigger picture. Jessalyn deserves this house. It's her childhood home. And it's the home I paid for, the home I've maintained for 40 years. With the money you made from those plant." "Drawings?" he scoffed. "Please, Jess told me her father provided the down payment." Another lie. My late husband, Jessalyn's father, had died when she was 3, leaving minimal life insurance. Every penny that went into this house had come from my work. Believe what you want, Rafferty, I said, suddenly tired. It doesn't change the facts. He took a step toward me, his voice dropping. You know what your problem is, Mirabelle. You've never understood your place. You're just a small-town illustrator who got lucky with one book deal decades ago. You've been riding that accomplishment, ever since, acting like you're something special. His words were designed to wound, to make me feel small, but strangely, they had the opposite effect. They clarified everything. If that's what you think of me after all these years, I said quietly, then it's definitely time for you to leave. We're not going anywhere, he replied, voice hard. In fact, I think you'll find life quite uncomfortable if you insist on staying. The threat hung in the air between us. For a moment, I felt a flicker of fear, not of physical harm, but of the psychological warfare they might wage. But then I remembered the letter in my pocket, the meeting with Valencia, the $9 million that would be mine in 48 hours. I didn't need to win this battle tonight. I just needed to hold my ground until I could change the playing field entirely. Good night, Rafferty, I said, standing up. I'm going to bed now. He looked surprised by my sudden disengagement, but moved aside as I headed for the stairs. This isn't over, he called after me. I turned back briefly. No, I agreed. It's just beginning. That night, I slept poorly, listening for any movement in the hallway, half expecting them to try something while I slept. But morning came without incident, bringing with it a renewed sense of purpose. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel confident. A deep blue blouse that brought out my eyes, tailored slacks, my good boots. Today would be pivotal, and I wanted to face it with dignity. When I came downstairs, Jessalyn was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and her laptop. She glanced up briefly, then returned to her screen without speaking. I made my own coffee, acutely aware of the tension filling the room. As I reached for a mug, I noticed several of my botanical illustrations were missing from the wall. Where? Are my drawings? I asked. Jessalyn didn't look up. We packed them. Since you're being unreasonable about moving, we decided to start the process anyway. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Those are my original works. Where did you put them? In storage, she said vaguely. Don't worry, they're fine. The dismissive way she spoke about my life's work, illustrations that museums had requested to display, made something snap inside me. I want them back. Now. Jessalyn finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. They're not here anymore. Raph took them to a storage unit this morning. Without my permission? Those illustrations are worth thousands. She rolled her eyes. They're just plant drawings, Mom. No one cares about old botanical sketches anymore. I set down my mug before I could drop it, my hand suddenly unsteady. Where is Rafferty now? Meeting with our lawyer, she replied, a hint of smugness in her tone. About our rights to this house. I didn't bother responding to the implied threat. Instead, I asked, which storage facility? Why does it matter? You'll get them back. Eventually. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. Jessalyn, those illustrations are my intellectual property. Taking them without permission is theft. She laughed, a sharp, unkind sound. Are you going to call the police on your own daughter? That would look great for both of us at Thornfield. She was right that a public scandal would be uncomfortable, but she'd miscalculated if she thought that would stop me. I picked up my phone and dialed. Who are you calling? She demanded. I didn't answer, waiting instead for the call to connect. Port Arbel Police Department, non-emergency line, came the response. Jessalyn's eyes widened. She stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. You wouldn't dare! I looked directly at her as I spoke into the phone. Yes, I'd like to report stolen property. Mom! She hissed, reaching for the phone. I stepped back, continuing my report. My name is Mirabelle Thornwick. My daughter and son-in-law have removed valuable artwork from my home without permission and are refusing to tell me where they've taken it. As I spoke with the dispatcher, Jesselyn's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally a calculating calm. She pulled out her own phone and stepped into the hallway, speaking in low, urgent tones. 10 minutes later, as I was finishing my police report, Rafferty burst through the front door, face flushed with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "Protecting my property," I replied evenly. "The police will be here shortly to take a formal statement." "For God's sake, they're just some old drawings," he exploded. "We were keeping them safe. By removing them from my house without permission, to a location you refuse to disclose?" Jesselyn stepped between us. "Fine. They're at Port Arbel Storage on Harbor Road, Unit 217. Happy now? Will you call off the police?" "No," I said simply. "This has gone far enough. I want everything documented officially." Rafferty's face darkened. "You have no idea what you're doing. I have connections in this town. One call, and your reputation will be destroyed." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, making sure my phone was still recording. He caught himself, aware he'd overstepped. "I'm stating facts. No one will believe you over us. People already think you're losing it." "Then I suppose we'll see who's more credible," I replied, a strange calm settling over me. "Me, with documentation of my property, ownership and police reports of theft, or you with vague claims about my competence?" The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the police. What followed was an hour of statements, documentation, and barely contained hostility. The officers were professional, but clearly uncomfortable mediating a family dispute. They explained that while they could document the removal of the illustrations as a civil matter, criminal charges would be complex given the family relationship. "We recommend resolving this through civil court," the older officer advised, "or family mediation." I nodded, having expected as much. This wasn't about criminal charges. It was about establishing a paper trail, about making it clear I wouldn't be bullied. After the police left, the house fell into a tense silence. Jesselyn and Rafferty retreated upstairs, occasionally moving around heavily enough that I could track their movements. I used the opportunity to call Valencia again, updating her on the situation. "You did the right thing," she assured me. "Document everything. I've prepared the formal eviction notice. It can be served today if you're ready." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'm ready." "There's something else to consider," Valencia added carefully. "Given the escalating tension, have you thought about securing temporary accommodation for yourself, just until this is resolved?" I hesitated. Leaving felt like conceding defeat, but staying might be increasingly difficult, even dangerous. "I could check into a hotel," I admitted. "I think that would be wise," she agreed. "Pack essentials, including anything valuable or irreplaceable. I'll have my associate deliver the eviction notice this afternoon." After we hung up, I moved through the house with new purpose, gathering essential items and personal treasures. My hands lingered on photographs, keepsakes, the small mementos of a life lived fully. I packed 2 suitcases methodically, focusing on practical needs and items of sentimental value. I was closing the second suitcase when Jesselyn appeared in my bedroom doorway, her expression shifting from confrontational to confused as she registered what I was doing. "You're leaving?" she asked, sounding oddly vulnerable for a moment. "For now," I replied, refusing to look at her. "So after all that drama, you're just giving up?" I finally met her gaze. "I'm not giving up anything. I'm removing myself from a toxic situation temporarily, on the advice of my attorney." Her eyes narrowed at the mention of an attorney. "So you're lawyering up against your own daughter? Nice, Mom. Really nice." I hired an attorney after you and Rafferty tried to force me into assisted living and remove me from my own home. I corrected her. Everything that's happening now is a consequence of those actions. We were trying to help you. No, I said quietly. You were trying to help yourselves to my property while convincing yourselves, and others, that it was for my benefit. She looked away, unable to hold my gaze. You don't understand anything. I understand more than you think, Jessalyn. I zipped the suitcase closed with finality. An eviction notice will be delivered this afternoon. You and Rafferty have 30 days to find new accommodations. Her head snapped up, eyes widening. You're evicting us? Your own family? Yes. Where are we supposed to go? You know Raf's business collapsed. That's not my problem anymore, I said, surprised by how easily the words came. You made your choice when you decided I was expendable. Her face crumpled for a moment before hardening again. You'll regret this. When you're old and alone with no one to care for you, you'll remember this day. I lifted my suitcases, oddly unburdened despite their weight. I'll remember it as the day I finally stood up for myself. As I moved toward the door, she stepped aside, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, yes, but something else too. Something that might have been fear or even respect. Downstairs, I could hear Rafferty on the phone, his voice tense and clipped. He fell silent as I descended with my suitcases, watching me with cold calculation. Running away? He asked. Strategic retreat, I corrected him. Very different thing. His laugh was humorless. You know, I never understood why Jess was so afraid of becoming like you. Now I see it. You're heartless. The accusation should have stung, but instead, it strengthened my resolve. No, Rafferty. I've given my heart away too freely for too long. That ends today. I walked past him to the front door, pausing only to look back at the home I'd built, the life I'd created. I would return, but when I did, everything would be different. Goodbye, I said, not to Rafferty or the house, but to the woman I had been. The woman who would have continued sacrificing herself for people who saw her only as a resource to be used. As I stepped onto the porch, the coastal breeze caught my hair, carrying with it the salt tang of possibility. My lawyer's car was just pulling up to the curb, right on schedule. Behind me, I could hear Rafferty shouting for Jessalyn, his voice tight with panic. I didn't look back again. Instead, I walked toward the waiting car, toward the future I would build, not for my daughter, not for anyone else, but for myself. For the first time in decades, I felt truly free. The Crimson Tide Hotel was nothing like I'd imagined. Standing in the marble-floored lobby with its soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, I felt distinctly out of place in my sensible shoes and travel-wrinkled clothes. The receptionist, a young woman with an immaculate chignon, glanced up with the practiced smile of someone who deals with the wealthy daily. Welcome to the Crimson Tide. How may I assist you today? I set my suitcases down carefully. I'd like a room, please, for at least 2 weeks. Her fingers moved efficiently across her keyboard. We have a standard king available on the 4th floor at $250 per night. Do you have something with a view of the harbor? I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. She looked up, reassessing. Me. Our harbor view suites begin at $475 per night. That's fine, I said, sliding my new debit card across the polished counter. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as she processed the payment. Very good, Ms. Thornwick. Would you like assistance? With your luggage? 20 minutes later, I stood in a suite larger than my kitchen and dining room combined. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Port Arbel's picturesque harbor, the lighthouse standing sentinel on the distant point. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, while a sitting area with plush furniture occupied another. The bathroom featured a deep soaking tub I could actually stretch out in. I sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. Just yesterday, I'd been in my home of nearly 4 decades, thinking about how to stretch my pension to cover the increasing property taxes. Now I was in a luxury hotel suite with millions in the bank. The contrast was dizzying. My phone buzzed, with a text from Valencia. Eviction notice has been served. Call me when you're settled. I took a deep breath and dialed her number. How did they take it? I asked when she answered. About as expected, Valencia replied. Your son-in-law tried to intimidate my associate, threatened legal action. Your daughter became quite emotional. But the notice has been properly delivered and documented. They have 30 days. Thank you, I said, looking out at the harbor. What happens now? Now we secure your assets and prepare for any counter moves they might make. Have you decided what to do about your illustrations? The botanical illustrations, my life's work, were still in that storage unit. While not my most pressing concern, they represented decades of meticulous artistry and were worth considerable money. I want them back, I said firmly. I'll have my investigator verify they're still in the storage unit, then we can get a court order if necessary, Valencia assured me. In the meantime, I suggest you meet with the financial advisor the Lottery Commission connected you with. Proper management of your winnings will be crucial. After hanging up, I unpacked my few belongings, hanging clothes in the spacious closet and arranging toiletries in the marble bathroom. The simple domestic tasks helped ground me in this unfamiliar reality. When I finished, I pulled out my notebook, the one possession I never traveled without, and began making lists. First, meet with financial advisor. Second, recover my illustrations. Third, consider long-term housing options. And somewhere further down, a task I was both dreading and anticipating. Decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with Jessalyn going forward. The next morning, after the best sleep I'd had in months, despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I met with Zachariah Pemberton, the financial advisor recommended by Linnea at the Lottery Commission. His office overlooked the commercial district of Westholme, all sleek lines and modern furnishings that contrasted with his own old-world demeanor. Ms. Thornwick, he greeted me, rising from behind his desk. A pleasure to meet you, Linnea. Speaks highly of you. I settled into the chair across from him. I'm not sure what she could possibly know about me from our brief meeting. He smiled. She said you asked intelligent questions and didn't immediately start shopping for sports cars. That puts you ahead of 90% of sudden wealth clients. For the next 2 hours, Zachariah walked me through options for managing my newfound fortune. He explained tax implications, investment strategies, trust structures, and charitable giving in terms I could understand. By the end, I had a clearer picture of how to protect and grow my wealth. Most lottery winners burn through their money within 5 years, he told me. But you strike me as someone who'll be the exception. I've lived frugally my entire adult life, I replied. I don't see that changing dramatically now. That's good, but do allow yourself some enjoyment, he advised. There's a balance to be found between prudence and pleasure. I left his office with a comprehensive financial plan and the first installment of my winnings properly invested. The remainder would transfer within the week, but already I had access to more money than I'd ever had in my life. Walking back toward the hotel, I passed the window of Blackburn Auction House, Port Arbel's premier establishment for fine art and antiques. A sign in the window caught my eye. Maritime Collection Auction, Saturday. On impulse, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The space was hushed and elegant, with soft lighting illuminating carefully arranged displays of art and artifacts. A woman with silver-streaked black hair approached, her tailored suit and pearls exuding quiet sophistication. Welcome to Blackburn's. I'm Imogen Blackburn. May I help you find something specific today? I'm just browsing, I said. I noticed the sign about Saturday's auction. Ah, yes, the Harbor Master Collection. Quite extraordinary. Maritime. Artifacts spanning 3 centuries of Port Arbel's history. Would you like a catalog? She handed me a glossy booklet, and I flipped through it idly until a particular item caught my attention. A set of original charts and maps of the Port Arbel coastline from the 1800s, meticulously detailed with handwritten notes on local flora. These are beautiful, I murmured. They're quite special, Imogen agreed. Created by Captain Elias Winthrop, who was not only a master navigator but also an amateur botanist. He documented several coastal plant species that weren't formally classified until decades later. My interest deepened. Will these go for much? Imogen studied me with newfound interest. The reserve is set at $75,000, but we expect them to fetch closer to $100,000. Are you a collector, Ms. Thornwick, Mirabelle Thornwick? And no, not yet, but I might become one. Recognition flickered in her eyes. Thornwick. Are you the botanical illustrator who worked on the Coastal Flora Encyclopedia? Your watercolors of the tidal marsh? Orchids were exquisite. Warmth bloomed in my chest at being recognized for my work. Yes, that was me. Though it's been some years since I've published anything new. Our clients would be fascinated to meet you. Will you be attending the auction? I believe I will, I said, surprising myself again. As I continued browsing, Imogen pointed out other items that might interest someone with my background. Her knowledge was impressive, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversation about art and history. Topics Jesselyn and Rafferty had always dismissed as boring. Might I make a suggestion? Imogen asked as I prepared to leave. If you're interested in the charts, come to our preview event tomorrow evening. It's by invitation only, but I'd be delighted to add you to the guest list. You'll have a chance to examine the items more closely before the auction. I accepted her card with the event details, feeling a small thrill at being invited into this exclusive world that had always seemed beyond my reach. Back at the hotel, I faced a practical problem. I had nothing suitable to wear to such an event. My wardrobe consisted mainly of practical clothing for gardening, painting, and the occasional community function. Nothing that would fit in at an upscale auction preview. I called down to the concierge, a helpful young man named Felix who had assisted with my luggage. Felix, can you recommend a good clothing boutique nearby? Something elegant? Of course, Ms. Thornwick. For what occasion are you shopping? An auction preview at Blackburn's tomorrow evening. There was a note of approval in his voice. In that case, I'd suggest Elysia on Harbor Street. They specialize in classic, sophisticated pieces. Would you like me to call ahead for you? An hour later, I was being attended to by the owner, of Elysia herself, a statuesque woman named Vivian who took one look at me and seemed to immediately understand what I needed. You have lovely bone structure, she observed, walking around me. And your coloring, that silver-auburn combination, is stunning. We should emphasize that. What followed was unlike any shopping experience I'd ever had. Vivian selected pieces with an artist's eye, explaining why each would work for my frame, my coloring, my age. There was no pressure to look younger, just to look my best. This, she said, holding up a silk dress in a deep teal that caught the lights in my eyes, will be perfect for Blackburn's, elegant without trying too hard. You'll stand out for all the right reasons. I stepped out of the dressing room in the teal dress, a soft cashmere wrap, and heeled shoes that were somehow both stylish and comfortable. The woman in the mirror looked like me, but a version I'd never seen before, confident, distinguished, even beautiful in a way I hadn't considered myself in years. Yes, Vivian said with satisfaction, this is exactly right. I left with not just the outfit for Blackburn's, but several others. 2 more dresses, tailored slacks, blouses in colors I'd never have chosen for myself, but that somehow made me look vibrant rather than washed out, and accessories that pulled everything together. The total came to more than I'd spent on clothing in the past 5 years combined, but I signed the receipt without hesitation. As I returned to the hotel with my purchases, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street, Rafferty's sleek, black sedan. So they'd found me already. I wasn't particularly surprised. Port Arbel wasn't that large, and the Crimson Tide was the most obvious place for someone with money to stay. Rather than feeling intimidated, I felt a surge of defiance. Let them watch. Let them wonder. I was done hiding. I walked through the lobby with my head high, shopping bags swinging at my side. If Rafferty was surveilling the hotel, he'd see a woman who wasn't cowering, wasn't broken. He'd see someone transformed. In my suite, I hung up my new clothes with care, already anticipating tomorrow's event. Then I called Valencia to update her about Rafferty's presence. I expected as much, she said. They'll be looking for leverage, information, anything they can use. Be careful about what you discuss in public spaces. Should I be worried about more than just surveillance? I asked. I don't think they'd risk anything illegal, but document any interactions. If they approach you, record the conversation if possible. After we hung up, I ordered room service, another small luxury I'd never allowed myself before, and sat by the window watching the harbor lights come on as twilight descended. There was a strange peace in this in-between place, this liminal space between my old life and whatever came next. The following evening, I dressed for the Blackburn event with unusual care. The teal dress draped elegantly, the fabric catching, the light as I moved. I applied makeup with a steadier hand than usual, defining my eyes and adding color to my lips. The woman who looked back from the mirror seemed both familiar and foreign. Still me, but with a quiet confidence I hadn't worn in years. As I crossed the hotel lobby, I noticed several appreciative glances from other guests. Felix at the concierge desk did a double-take before breaking into a wide smile. Ms. Thornwick, you look absolutely stunning. Shall I call for a car to take you to Blackburn's? The auction house was transformed for the evening, with soft lighting and servers circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Imogen greeted me at the entrance, elegant in black with a single strand of pearls. Mirabelle, I'm so pleased you could join us, she said, using my first name as if we were old friends. There are several people I'd like you to meet who admire your work. Before I could process that statement, she was guiding me through the crowd, introducing me to collectors, artists, and Port Arbel's cultural elite. To my surprise, many knew my name and spoke about my illustrations with genuine appreciation. Your rendering of the tidal marsh ecosystems changed how I see our coastline, an older gentleman told me earnestly. I've walked those beaches my entire life, but your work made me notice details I'd overlooked for decades. The precision in your line work is remarkable, commented a younger woman who introduced herself as a botanical photographer. Digital imaging still can't capture what you achieved with watercolor and ink. Each conversation left me feeling more grounded, more connected to the artist I'd once been, the one I perhaps still was, beneath the layers of motherhood and sacrifice that had come to define me. As I circulated through the room, studying the maritime artifacts that would be auctioned on Saturday, I became aware of a ripple of tension. Glancing toward the entrance, I saw what, or rather who, had caused it. Octavia Harcourt stood in the doorway, scanning the crowd with the imperious air of someone who expected to be noticed. And beside her, looking distinctly uncomfortable in a too-tight cocktail dress, was Jessalyn. My daughter's eyes widened when she spotted me across the room, her mouth actually dropping open in shock. I was suddenly grateful for the teal dress, the carefully applied makeup, the confidence I'd been cultivating. Let her see me like this, not as the mother she could dismiss, but as a woman in her own right, moving in circles she clearly hadn't expected. Imogen appeared at my elbow, her gaze following mine. Acquaintances of yours? My daughter and her friend, I said quietly. Understanding flickered in Imogen's eyes. Ah, Would you prefer to avoid them? I considered it briefly, then straightened my shoulders. No, but I wouldn't mind having someone nearby when they approach. They will approach. Imogen nodded, gesturing subtly to a tall, distinguished man examining a display case nearby. Lawrence is our security consultant, former police detective. He'll keep an eye on things without being obvious. Sure enough, Jessalyn and Octavia were making their way toward me, navigating through the crowd with determination. Jessalyn's expression was a complex mixture of confusion, anger, and, surprisingly, uncertainty. She wasn't in control of this situation, and she knew it. "Mother," she said when they reached me, her voice pitched to Carrie. "What a surprise finding you here." I took a sip of champagne. "Is it? I imagine that's why you came." Octavia inserted herself into the conversation with practiced ease. "Mirabelle, darling, no one's seen you since you left home so abruptly. Jessalyn's been worried sick." The lie was so blatant I almost laughed. "Has she? How thoughtful. And yet, neither of you has called or texted to check on me." "We didn't know where you were," Jessalyn protested. "You found me now," I pointed out mildly, "when it suited your purposes." Octavia glanced around, clearly gauging who might be listening. "This isn't really the place for a family discussion, is it? Perhaps we could meet somewhere more private." "I'm quite comfortable having this conversation right here," I replied. "In fact, I was just about to examine those coastal charts more closely, if you'll excuse me." I moved toward the display case containing Captain Winthrop's charts, aware of them following close behind. Lawrence, the security consultant, shifted his position subtly to keep us in view. "Mom!" Jessalyn hissed, dropping the formal "mother" now that her temper was rising. "What are you doing? How are you even here? This event costs a fortune to attend." "I was invited," I said simply, bending to study the detailed renderings of coastline and flora. "By whom?" she demanded. "By me," Imogen said, materializing beside us. Mirabelle's reputation as a botanical illustrator made her a natural guest for this preview. Her work on coastal ecosystems dovetails beautifully with Captain Winthrop's maritime charts. Jessalyn blinked, clearly caught off guard by this information. She'd spent so long dismissing my work as insignificant that hearing it praised in this setting seemed to genuinely confuse her. Octavia, ever the social chameleon, shifted strategies immediately. "Of course, Mirabelle's work is quite respected in certain circles. That's partly why we've been so concerned. Her episode. Leaving home so suddenly, making those wild accusations against her family. We're worried about her mental state." My blood ran cold at the implication. This was their angle, painting me as unstable, perhaps even incompetent. If they could convince others I wasn't in my right mind, they might be able to challenge the eviction, maybe even seek conservatorship. "How interesting," Imogen replied, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "Mirabelle seems perfectly lucid, to me. In fact, we've been discussing her potentially curating a special exhibition of botanical art for us next season." This was news to me, but I kept my expression neutral, grateful for Imogen's quick thinking. "That would be premature," Octavia said smoothly. "Mirabelle's health is our primary concern right now. Her doctors have advised against any stressful new commitments." "I don't have any doctors advising me about anything," I stated firmly. "And I'm in excellent health, thank you." Jessalyn placed a hand on my arm, her grip just tight enough to be uncomfortable. "Mom, you know you've been forgetting things. The incidents with the stove, the missed appointments. It's okay to admit you need help." I removed her hand. "I haven't missed any appointments, and the only issue with the stove was when you rearranged my kitchen without asking." Lawrence had drifted closer, his presence reassuring. Jessalyn noticed him watching and dropped her voice. "You're embarrassing yourself," she whispered furiously. "Coming to an event like this, pretending you belong here. Where did you even get that dress? It looks ridiculous on someone your age." The old me would have been wounded by this attack. The new me simply raised an eyebrow. "If you're finished, I have charts to examine and people to meet. Enjoy the event." I turned back to the display, effectively dismissing them. Octavia tugged at Jessalyn's arm, clearly sensing they were losing this public confrontation. "We'll talk later," Jessalyn said, trying to sound authoritative but achieving only petulance. "This isn't over." "It never is with you," I replied without looking up. After they retreated, Imogen rejoined me. "Well handled. They seem challenging." "That's one word for it," I agreed. "Thank you for the support. And for the fictional curator position." Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Who said it was fictional? I've been considering an exhibition of botanical art for months. Your name came up in planning discussions, but we hadn't reached out yet." I stared at her in surprise. "You're serious?" "Entirely. We can discuss details after the auction, if you're interested." She gestured toward the charts I'd been admiring. "Speaking of which, I noticed your genuine appreciation for these. Will you be bidding on Saturday?" The question caught me off guard. Before this week, the idea of spending tens of thousands on antique charts would have been unthinkable. Now. "Yes," I decided. "I believe I will." Imogen nodded, pleased. "Excellent. Now, there's someone else you should meet. Our maritime historian has been studying Winthrop's work for decades." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of interesting conversations, new connections, and a growing sense that I was stepping into a world that had always existed alongside mine, but that I'd never allowed myself to enter. By the time I returned to the hotel, I felt both exhausted and exhilarated. Saturday's auction was an education in itself. I arrived early, taking a seat toward the back where I could observe without being obvious. The room filled quickly with serious collectors, museum representatives, and the merely curious. Jessalyn and Octavia were notably absent, which was a relief. When the Winthrop charts came up for bidding, I raised my paddle with a confidence that surprised me. The bidding started at $60,000 and quickly rose. At $90,000, most bidders had dropped out, leaving only myself and a representative from the Maritime Museum in West Home. $95,000, the museum representative called. I hesitated only briefly. $100,000. There was a pause, a consultation between the museum representative and someone on the phone, then a reluctant shake of the head. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a satisfying thud. Sold to bidder number 47 for $100,000. Just like that, I'd made the largest purchase of my life, apart from my house, and I felt not regret, but satisfaction. These charts, with their meticulous renderings of the same coastline I'd spent decades studying and illustrating, felt like a connection to a kindred spirit across time. After the auction concluded, I completed the paperwork and arranged for the charts to be properly stored until I had a permanent home for them. As I was finishing, Imogen approached with a man I recognized as the museum representative who had bid against me. "Mirabelle, I'd like you to meet Dr. Harrison Wilford from the Maritime Museum. He's quite interested in speaking with you about your acquisition." Dr. Wilford, a trim man with spectacles and an earnest manner, extended his hand. "Miss Thornwick, congratulations on your purchase. The Winthrop charts are quite significant historically." "Thank you." "I was drawn to them immediately," I replied, shaking his hand. "The museum has been hoping to acquire them for our permanent collection," he explained. "They complement our existing Winthrop materials beautifully. Would you perhaps consider a loan arrangement? We could provide proper conservation, public display, and of course full attribution to you as the owner." The request was unexpected but intriguing. I hadn't considered that possibility. "Perhaps you could visit the museum Next week, see our Winthrop collection and discuss options? The charts deserve to be seen by the public, but we understand they're your property now. I agreed to visit, pleasantly surprised by this new development. As Dr. Wilford excused himself, Imogen gave me an approving smile. Well played. A museum. Loan gives you the prestige of ownership while they handle conservation and storage. Plus, it's an excellent way to establish yourself in collector circles. I hadn't been thinking strategically at all, but I nodded as if that had been my plan. The charts should be seen by people who appreciate them. Indeed, Imogen agreed. Now, about that exhibition we discussed. Are you free for lunch on Tuesday? By the time I returned to the hotel, news of my auction purchase had apparently spread. Felix greeted me with increased deference, and I noticed other staff members watching me with new interest. In Port Arbel, Blackburn's auctions were social events, and significant purchases became local news. I'd just settled in my suite when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number with Port Arbel's prefix. Hello? Ms. Thornwick? A man's voice, vaguely familiar. This is Thaddeus Quinn from Seaside Realty. We met briefly at Blackburn's last night. I vaguely recalled him, tall, silver-haired, with an expensive watch and ready smile. Yes, Mr. Quinn. What can I do for you? I understand you're currently between residences, and I thought you might be interested in a property that's just come on the market. It's quite exclusive, not even listed publicly yet. Given your evident appreciation for historical properties with character, I believe it might suit you perfectly. My first impulse was to decline politely. I wasn't ready to think about a new permanent home yet. But then I remembered Zachariah's advice about balance, about allowing myself some pleasure alongside prudence. What kind of property is it? A restored lighthouse keeper's cottage on North Point, nearly 2 acres, of land with private beach access, extensively modernized inside while maintaining historical features. The views are unparalleled. Despite myself, I was intrigued. The North Point area was one of Port Arbel's most desirable locations, with its rugged coastline and relative seclusion. When could I see it? I could arrange a private viewing tomorrow morning, if that suits you. I agreed to meet him at the property at 10 a.m., curiosity getting the better of caution. After hanging up, I researched Thaddeus Quinn online, confirming he was indeed a legitimate real estate agent specializing in high-end properties. His most recent sale had been a historic mansion to a tech entrepreneur from Westholme for $2 million. That night, I dreamed of lighthouses and rocky shores, of charts mapping unknown territories, of rooms filled with light and possibility. When I woke, the decision to view the property felt right somehow. Not a commitment, but an exploration. The North Point Road wound along the coastline, revealing increasingly spectacular views with each turn. I'd hired a car service for the trip, not wanting to arrive in a taxi. The driver, professional and discreet, seemed accustomed to transporting clients to luxury properties. When we rounded the final bend, the lighthouse keeper's cottage came into view, and my breath caught. The structure was exactly as its name suggested, a stone cottage adjacent to Port Arbel's historic North Point Lighthouse. The main building was 2 stories of weathered stone with a modern glass extension facing the ocean. Gardens tumbled down the sloping property toward a private cove below. Thaddeus was waiting in the circular drive, his silver Mercedes parked nearby. He greeted me with restrained enthusiasm, the mark of an experienced agent who knew when to let a property speak for itself. Ms. Thornwick, welcome to Lighthouse Point. Shall we begin the tour? The interior was a masterful blend of historical features and modern conveniences. Original stone walls and wood beams contrasted with sleek kitchen appliances and contemporary lighting. The living areas opened to the glass extension, a sun-filled space with panoramic views of the coastline stretching in both directions. The previous owner was an architect, Thaddeus explained as we moved through the rooms. He preserved the historical elements while creating a highly functional modern home. The glass pavilion was his signature addition. It's heated through, radiant floors, and has special coatings to prevent bird strikes. Upstairs, the main bedroom suite occupied the entire second floor of the glass extension, creating the sensation of sleeping suspended above the ocean. A private terrace wrapped around the exterior, accessible through sliding doors. The lighthouse itself is still operational but automated, Thaddeus continued. It's maintained by the Port Arbel Historical Society, but this property includes exclusive access rights and the original keeper's office, which the previous owner converted to a studio. My heart quickened at the mention of a studio. We descended a stone path to a separate building nestled against the cliff face, a perfect square of stone with large north-facing windows. The light in here is exceptional, Thaddeus noted. The architect used it as a drafting studio, but it would be ideal for an artist. I stepped inside, immediately understanding what he meant. The quality of light was extraordinary, clear and even, perfect for detailed work. I could imagine my drafting table here, my paints and brushes arranged along the built-in shelves, the ocean view providing endless inspiration. The property includes the cottage, studio, and surrounding 8 acres, with deeded rights to the cove below, Thaddeus said, allowing me time to absorb the space. It's quite unique, one of only 3 private properties with lighthouse access on the entire coast. What's the asking price? I finally asked, trying to sound casual. $2 million, he replied, watching my reaction carefully. The historical designation provides some tax advantages, and the renovations are relatively recent. New roof, updated systems, seismic retrofitting. 3 days ago, such a figure would have been laughably beyond my reach. Now it represented less than half of my lottery winnings, even after taxes and initial investments. I'd like to see the gardens, I said, neither accepting nor rejecting. The price. Thaddeus led me along stone paths that wound through surprisingly lush gardens, protected from the worst of the sea winds by clever landscaping and the natural contours of the land. Native plants dominated, the same coastal species I'd spent years illustrating. The irrigation system is automated, he explained, and there's a full-time gardener who comes twice weekly, included in the property management package if desired. At the bottom of the property, stone steps led down to a small, perfect crescent of sandy beach, sheltered by rocky outcroppings on either side. The privacy was complete. No neighboring homes visible, just sea, sky, and shore. It's beautiful, I admitted. It suits you, Thaddeus replied unexpectedly. If you don't mind, my saying so. Some properties seem to wait for the right owner. We climbed back up to the main house, where he provided a folder of information, property details, historical documentation, maintenance records. Take your time to consider, he said. But I should mention there's already interest from a buyer. In Westholme. I wouldn't wait too long. As the car service drove me back to the hotel, I found myself thinking not about practical considerations, the cost, the maintenance, the size, but about how it had felt to stand in that studio, to look out at the coast I'd spent a lifetime illustrating, to imagine beginning again in a space that seemed designed for creation. Back at the hotel, I called Valencia for her perspective. You're not asking if you can afford it, she observed after I described the property. You're asking if you should allow yourself to have it. Her insight was uncomfortably accurate. It feels excessive. Does it? Or does it feel like finally claiming the space you need, physically, creatively, emotionally? From what you've told me about your life in that house with Jesselyn and Rafferty, you've been compressed into smaller and smaller spaces, your needs subordinated to theirs. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. Over the years, my studio had become Jesselyn's playroom, then her study, then storage, and finally Rafferty's office. My garden had been reduced to make room for Jesselyn's patio entertaining area. Even my kitchen had been rearranged to suit their preferences, not mine. Visit your financial advisor, Valencia suggested. Run the numbers. But Mirabelle, if this property speaks to you, if you can afford it without compromising your financial security, then perhaps it's time to give yourself permission to claim your space in the world. After we hung up, I sat by the hotel window, watching boats crossing the harbor as the afternoon light turned golden. The lighthouse in the distance flashed its steady rhythm, a beacon guiding ships safely to shore. For decades, I'd been the lighthouse for others, steady, reliable, sacrificing. Perhaps now it was time to guide myself home. The morning newspaper arrived with my breakfast tray, and there on the society page was a photo from the Blackburn auction. I nearly choked on my tea when I saw it. There I was, poised and elegant in the teal dress, speaking with Imogen and Dr. Wilford. The caption read, "Local artist Mirabelle Thornwick acquires rare Winthrop charts for record sum." A smaller article below detailed my purchase and mentioned the potential museum loan arrangement. I set the paper down with trembling hands. It was one thing to make a bold move privately. It was another entirely to see it announced to all of Port Arbel. I could only imagine Jesselyn's reaction when she saw the paper delivered to my former home, where she and Rafferty were still living during the eviction period. My phone rang almost immediately. Jesselyn, of course. "Would you care to explain?" she demanded without preamble. "Good morning to you too," I replied, taking another sip of tea. "Don't play games, Mother. The newspaper says you spent $100,000 on some old maps. Where did you get that kind of money?" I considered my options. The truth would come out eventually. Lottery winners couldn't stay anonymous forever, not in a town like Port Arbel, but I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Not while they were still in my house, with access to my belongings. "My finances are no longer your concern, Jesselyn," I said evenly. "Of course they're my concern. You're my mother. Either you've lost your mind and are spending money you don't have, or you've been hiding assets while claiming poverty." I had never claimed poverty, merely prudence, a distinction Jesselyn had never appreciated. But her accusation stung nonetheless. "I assure you the purchase was well within my means," I said. "The charts are an investment, and they'll be properly conserved at the Maritime Museum." "An investment?" she scoffed. "Since when do you know anything about investments? You've never had 2 pennies to rub together." "Unless—" Her voice changed, becoming calculating. "Did Dad leave something you never told me about? Some account or property that's finally paid out?" The suggestion that I'd hidden her father's assets from her was so insulting I nearly hung up. Her father had left barely enough life insurance to cover his funeral expenses, and I'd spent the next 30 years working to provide for us both. "Your father left nothing but debts," I said coldly, "which I paid while raising you alone." "Then how—" "As I said, my finances are no longer your concern. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment." I ended the call before she could protest, my hands still shaking with anger. I had never imagined my daughter could think so little of me, could assume I'd hidden money from her while working multiple jobs to support us. 2 could play at the information control game. I had no obligation to explain my lottery win to her, especially when she and Rafferty had already demonstrated they'd try to capitalize on any advantage. My appointment was with Zachariah Pemberton, my financial advisor, to discuss the potential purchase of Lighthouse Point. The numbers worked. The property would take less than half my lottery winnings, leaving plenty for investments, living, expenses, and whatever else I might need or want. "It's a solid purchase," Zachariah confirmed. "The location alone ensures it will hold value, and the historical designation provides tax benefits that make the carrying costs quite reasonable." "So you think I should move forward?" I asked, still hesitant to commit to such a large expenditure. "From a financial perspective, absolutely. The question is whether it's the right property for you personally." I thought about the studio. With its perfect light, the gardens filled with native plants I'd spent decades illustrating, the privacy and peace of the setting. It feels right, I admitted, but I worry I'm being impulsive because of the situation with my daughter. Zachariah leaned back in his chair, studying me. Ms. Thornwick, may I be frank? Most lottery winners make their worst decisions in the first year. They buy depreciating assets, sports cars, boats, vacation timeshares, or they make risky investments chasing even bigger returns. You're considering a historically significant property in a prime location that also happens to match your professional interests perfectly. That's not impulsive. That's insightful. His words gave me the confidence I needed. After our meeting, I called Thaddeus Quinn and arranged to make an offer on Lighthouse Point. Excellent, he said, sounding genuinely pleased. I'll draw up the paperwork immediately. The seller is motivated, so I think we can move quickly. Are you prepared to close within 30 days? 30 days, the same time frame as the eviction notice for Jesselyn and Rafferty. It seemed fitting somehow that as one chapter closed, another would begin. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready. The wheels were set in motion. Offer, acceptance, inspections, paperwork. I threw myself into the process with unexpected enthusiasm, discovering a talent for decision-making I hadn't realized I possessed. 3 days after making my offer, I met Dr. Wilford at the Maritime Museum to discuss the loan arrangement for the Winthrop charts. The museum was a modern building on West Holmes waterfront, all glass and steel but somehow still harmonizing with the historic shipyard nearby. Dr. Wilford greeted me in the lobby, clearly excited to show me their collection. We've prepared a special display integrating where your charts would fit, he explained, leading me toward the Maritime History Wing. The Winthrop collection occupied a dedicated room, with artifacts from the captain's voyages arranged chronologically. Display cases held navigational instruments, journals, specimens of preserved marine life, and earlier maps that lacked the detail of the charts I'd purchased. As you can see, Dr. Wilford explained, gesturing to an empty case at the center of the room, your charts would complete the narrative. They represent the culmination of Winthrop's surveying work and his most significant contribution to botanical documentation. It's impressive, I admitted, genuinely moved by the care with which they'd curated the captain's legacy. We've prepared a draft loan agreement for your review, he continued, handing me a folder. It's for an initial period of 5 years, renewable thereafter. The museum would handle all conservation, insurance, and security. Your name would appear, prominently as the owner, of course. As I reviewed the agreement, something caught my eye. A smaller display case near the exit containing botanical illustrations of coastal plants. Those are quite special, Dr. Wilford said, following my call. Gaze. Contemporary renderings of the same species Winthrop documented, created for the Coastal Flora Encyclopedia. We've been trying to track down the original artist for permission to expand the display, but with limited success. I moved closer, recognition dawning. The illustrations were mine, work I'd done nearly 20 years earlier for the Encyclopedia project. I'm the artist, I said quietly. Dr. Wilford's eyes widened. You're Monsieur Thornwick? The botanical illustrator? I had no... For the acquisition of the charts, your interest, it makes perfect sense now. A plan began forming in my mind. Dr. Wilford, I believe I could offer something more valuable than just a loan of the charts. By the time I left the museum 2 hours later, we had expanded our agreement considerably. Not only would I loan the Winthrop charts, but I would also create a new series of illustrations documenting how the coastal flora had evolved over the 2 centuries since Winthrop's original surveys. The museum would host an exhibition of my work alongside the historical charts, with a potential traveling component to other maritime museums along the coast. For the first time in decades, I had a professional commission that excited me, that would use my skills to their fullest extent. The timing was perfect. By the time I needed to begin the serious work, I would be settled at Lighthouse Point, with its ideal studio and direct access to the coastal environments I needed to study. I practically floated back to the hotel, energized by this new direction. But my elation was short-lived. As the car pulled up to the Crimson Tide, I spotted Rafferty in the lobby, deep in conversation with the manager. Something about his posture, leaning in, gesturing emphatically, sent up warning flags. Instead of entering through the main doors, I asked the driver to take me to the service entrance. One of the benefits of staying at a luxury hotel was the staff's discretion. A generous tip to the kitchen porter got me inside and up a service elevator without being seen. Once in my suite, I called down to Felix at the concierge desk. "Felix, there's a man in the lobby. Tall, dark hair, expensive suit but slightly rumpled. Do you know what he's discussing with the manager?" Felix's voice dropped to a near whisper. "He's claiming to be your son-in-law, Ms. Thornwick. Says, there are concerns about your mental health and spending habits. The manager's been quite firm that guest information is confidential, but he's been persistent." My blood ran cold. They were escalating, moving from private accusations to public attempts to control me. "Thank you for letting me know. If he asks for my room number or tries to come up, please alert security immediately." "Of course, Ms. Thornwick. Would you like us to have someone stationed near your floor as a precaution?" "Yes, I think that would be wise." After hanging up, I called Valencia to update her on this new development. "They're getting desperate," she said. "The newspaper article about your auction purchase forced their hand. They need to establish a narrative about your mental competence before you make any more public moves." "What's their endgame here?" I asked. "Even if they somehow convinced people I'm unstable, what would that accomplish?" "If they could get a doctor to express concerns about your capacity to make financial decisions, they could petition for temporary conservatorship. It would freeze your assets until a court evaluation." The idea was chilling. Could they succeed? Unlikely, but not impossible. You've demonstrated clear financial acumen, you have professional advisors, and your decisions have been sound. But family conservatorship cases can be complicated. The best defense is continued public demonstration of your competence and independence. "Like the museum exhibition," I mused. "Exactly. Professional engagements, public appearances, establishing new relationships with respected individuals. All of this creates a record that would be difficult to challenge." After our call, I sat by the window, watching the harbor activity as I considered my options. Avoiding Rafferty in the lobby was one thing, but I couldn't hide in my room indefinitely. And if I changed hotels, they'd simply track me to the new location. No, it was time to be more strategic, more proactive. I called Imogen at Blackburn's. An idea forming. "Mirabelle, lovely to hear from you. How are you settling in with your acquisition?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling. The Maritime Museum has proposed an exhibition combining the Winthrop charts with new botanical illustrations I'd create specifically for the show. I was wondering if Blackburn's might be interested in hosting a small reception to announce the Casadi collaboration." There was a moment of surprised silence before Imogen responded with enthusiasm. "That's a wonderful idea. A private event celebrating both historical and contemporary Port Arbel artistry. We could invite museum patrons, collectors, the cultural community." "When were you thinking?" "As soon as possible," I admitted. "Within the week, if that's not imposing too much." If Imogen thought the timeline unusual, she didn't say so. "Let me speak with our events coordinator. I'm sure we can arrange something suitable. This is precisely the kind of cultural collaboration Blackburn's likes to support." By that evening, plans were in motion for a reception the following Thursday. The invitations would position me exactly as I needed to be seen, as a respected artist embarking on a significant professional project. not as a confused older woman making impulsive decisions. The next morning, I ventured down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast, half expecting to encounter Rafferty again. Instead, I found an envelope had been slipped under my door, a formal letter from a Dr. Elias Harmon expressing professional concern about my recent behavioral changes and unusual spending patterns based on information provided by family members. The letter requested that I schedule an evaluation at my earliest convenience. I recognized the name. Dr. Harmon was a colleague of Octavia's husband, both affiliated with Thornfield Academy's board. This wasn't a legitimate medical concern. It was the next step in Jesselyn and Rafferty's campaign. I took the letter directly to Valencia's office, where she reviewed it with growing indignation. "This borders on medical malpractice," she said, setting it down with distaste. "He's never examined you, never even met you, yet he's making insinuations about your mental state based solely on secondhand reports from interested parties. What should I do?" "Respond formally, through me." Will expressed surprise at his unprofessional conduct and requests that he provide specific evidence of any concerns, along with clarification of his relationship with your daughter and son-in-law. Will copy the state medical board on the correspondence. Her approach was perfect, not defensive, but firmly establishing that I had legal representation and wouldn't be intimidated. "In the meantime," Valencia continued, "we should accelerate the Lighthouse Point purchase if possible. The sooner you're established in your own property, the stronger your position." I left her office with a renewed sense of purpose. That afternoon, I met with Thaddeus to sign additional paperwork for Lighthouse Point. The seller had accepted my offer, and with a substantial deposit, we could potentially close in as little as 3 weeks. "I've arranged for a contractor to meet us at the property tomorrow," Thaddeus told me. "Any modifications you'd like to make can be discussed directly." The previous owner left detailed architectural plans that should simplify the process. The following day, standing in the light-filled studio at Lighthouse Point with the contractor, a practical woman named Ellis, who specialized in historical renovations, I felt a surge of creative energy I hadn't experienced in years. "The space works beautifully as is," I explained, "but I'd like to add custom storage for art supplies here, and possibly skylights to enhance the natural light." Ellis nodded, making notes. "Skylights are tricky in historic properties, but there are ways to incorporate them sympathetically. What about the main house? Any changes needed there?" We walked through each room, discussing potential adjustments, modernizing one bathroom, reconfiguring closets, updating the kitchen appliances while preserving the original cabinetry. The changes were modest, but would make the space truly mine. "How quickly could the work be completed?" I asked as we concluded our tour. Ellis consulted her notes. "With proper permits expedited, we could have the essential modifications done before you move in. The studio would be priority, then the bedroom and bathroom. Kitchen could follow after you're settled." "Perfect. Please proceed as quickly as possible." As we walked back to our cars, Ellis hesitated. "Ms. Thornwick, I hope you don't mind my asking, but are you the botanical illustrator? The one who did the Coastal Flora Encyclopedia?" Surprised, I nodded. Her face lit up. "My father was a park ranger. He used your illustrations to teach us about the local plants when I was growing up. He always said you captured their essence better than any photograph could." She gestured toward the coast. "This place seems perfect for you." Her words warmed me deeply. All those years of painstaking work, the hours spent observing and rendering each plant with precision, they had mattered to someone. They had helped a ranger father teach his daughter about the natural world. Driving back to the hotel, I felt a renewed conviction that I was on the right path. Lighthouse Point wasn't an impulsive purchase or an extravagant indulgence. It was the space I needed to reconnect with my work, my purpose. That conviction was tested the very next day when I arrived at Blackburn's to meet with Imogen about the reception. As I entered the auction house, I nearly collided with Jesselyn, who was exiting Imogen's office with a thunderous expression. She stopped short when she saw me, her surprise quickly morphing into anger. "So this is where you've been hiding." "I'm not hiding," I replied calmly. "I have a meeting with Imogen." "About your little party?" she sneered. "Yes, I just heard. All about it. Quite the reinvention you're attempting, from neglectful mother to celebrated artist." I kept my voice level, aware of the staff nearby. "I've always been an artist, Jesselyn. That was never a secret." "No, just something you resented us for interrupting," she shot back. "Poor Mirabelle, sacrificing her great talent for her family. Well, now you've got what you wanted. No family, just your precious drawings." The accusation stung, as she'd intended. For years I'd been careful never to make Jesselyn feel she'd derailed my career, had downplayed my work's significance to avoid any hint that motherhood had been a burden. "That's not true, and you know it," I said quietly. "I never regretted choosing to raise you. I only regret that you grew up believing your needs were the only ones that mattered." Her face flushed. "Oh, please. Spare me the martyrdom. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The attention, the recognition you think you deserve. Well, enjoy it while it lasts. People are starting to ask questions about your sudden spending sprees, your erratic behavior. There's nothing erratic about pursuing my professional interests," I pointed out. "And the only people asking questions are the ones you're prompting." She stepped closer, dropping her voice. "We know, Mother. About the money. Did you really think you could hide something like that?" "The Lottery Commission keeps records." My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. So they'd discovered my win, not surprising in a town this size, but unsettling nonetheless. "I wasn't hiding anything," I said carefully. "I simply hadn't decided how to proceed." "You mean you hadn't decided whether to share any of it with your own daughter?" she accused. "After everything we've done for you." The absurdity of that statement nearly made me laugh. "What exactly have you done? For me, Jesselyn? Moved into my house and taken over? Tried to force me into assisted living? Spread rumors about my mental competence?" She had the grace to look momentarily abashed before rallying. "We were trying to help you manage a house that was clearly too much for you. And now we know why you've been so resistant. You were sitting on millions while letting us think you were struggling." "I won the lottery 3 weeks ago," I clarified. "Long after you tried to ship me off to Serenity Gardens. And yes, I decided not to tell you immediately. Given how you've behaved since, that seems to have been the right decision." Imogen emerged from her office then, her expression carefully professional. "Mirabelle, I'm ready for our meeting now. Ms. Caldwell, thank you for stopping by." Jesselyn glared at us both before stalking out, the heels of her boots clicking sharply against the marble floor. "I apologize for that," I said once we were in Imogen's office. She waved away my concern. "Family dynamics are rarely simple. Now, about the reception. We've secured next Thursday evening. Dr. Wilford is delighted with the plan and has provided a list of museum patrons to invite. We've drafted the announcement emphasizing the collaborative nature of the exhibition." We spent the next hour finalizing details, selecting refreshments, and reviewing the guest list. The event was taking shape beautifully, positioning me exactly as I needed to be seen. As we concluded, Imogen hesitated before speaking again. "Mirabelle, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but I admire how you're handling what's clearly a difficult family situation. Many people in your position would become defensive or retreat. You're doing neither." Her words strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my independence or my lottery winnings. I was reclaiming my identity, my voice, after decades of diminishing myself to make room for others. The days leading up to the reception were filled with careful preparations. I met with Dr. Wilford to refine our exhibition concept, worked with a seamstress recommended by Vivian to alter a striking emerald dress for the event, and continued. the paperwork process for Lighthouse Point. Valencia kept me updated on legal matters. Her letter to Dr. Harmon had achieved its purpose. He had hastily backtracked, claiming his concerns were purely preliminary and not intended to suggest any formal diagnosis. The state medical board had requested additional information about his process, putting him on the defensive. The eviction proceedings against Jesselyn and Rafferty were progressing as scheduled. They had 3 weeks remaining before they would be legally required to vacate my house. Valencia had arranged for a security team to monitor the property during the transition to ensure no damage occurred and no possessions were removed inappropriately. The morning of the reception arrived with unexpected news. A friend of Felix from the Port Arbel Herald called to request an interview about my lottery win, the Lighthouse Point purchase, and the upcoming exhibition. Apparently, word had spread beyond the society pages, and the newspaper wanted to run a feature story. After consulting with Valencia, I agreed to the interview, seeing it as an opportunity to shape the narrative myself rather than allowing Jesselyn and Rafferty's insinuations to take root. The reporter, a thoughtful woman named Dahlia, met me in the hotel's private dining room. Her questions were respectful and insightful, focusing on my artistic background, my plans for the exhibition, and how the lottery win had enabled me to return to my professional roots. "There are rumors," she said carefully toward the end of our conversation, "about family disagreements regarding your recent decisions. Would you care to address those?" I had prepared for this question. Family dynamics are complex, especially when circumstances change suddenly. My focus now is on creating a home where I can pursue my work and contribute to Port Arbel's cultural community. The exhibition with the Maritime Museum is particularly meaningful to me as it connects historical documentation with contemporary observation, a conversation across time about our changing coastline. Dahlia nodded, clearly appreciating my redirection to the professional rather than the personal. One final question. What would you say to others who might find themselves with unexpected opportunities later in life? I considered this carefully. I'd say it's never too late to reconnect with the parts of yourself that may have been set aside. For me, that's my art, my observation of the natural world. For someone else, it might be music or writing or travel. The key is recognizing that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. You can't give from an empty well. After the interview, I returned to my suite to prepare for the evening's reception. As I dressed, applying makeup with more care than usual and fastening a simple pearl pendant around my neck, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Just weeks ago, I had been incrementally shrinking my presence in my own home, trying to avoid conflicts with Jesselyn and Rafferty, doubting my own perceptions and needs. Now I was preparing to host a reception announcing a museum exhibition of my work, living in a luxury hotel, and finalizing the purchase of a property that perfectly suited my artistic and personal requirements. The transformation wasn't just external. Something fundamental had shifted inside me, a reclamation of my voice, my agency, my right to make decisions based on my own priorities rather than others' expectations. As I stepped back to check my appearance in the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman looking back at me. Not because I looked so different, though the emerald dress was certainly more elegant than anything I'd worn in years, but because of the confidence in my posture, the clarity in my eyes. For decades, I'd made myself smaller to avoid confrontation, had accepted less than I deserved to keep peace, had surrendered my own dreams to facilitate others. No more. The woman in the mirror stood tall, unapologetic in her presence. My phone buzzed with a text from the car service Imogen had arranged. "Driver waiting whenever you're ready, Ms. Thornwick." I took one final look in the mirror, straightened my shoulders, and headed for the door. Whatever happened at the reception, whether Jesselyn and Rafferty appeared to cause a scene, whether whispers about my lottery win circulated among the guests, I was prepared. This was my night, my exhibition, my future. The lobby was busy with evening arrivals, guests dressed for dinner or theater outings. Felix spotted me from the concierge desk and hurried over. "Ms. Thornwick, you look absolutely stunning," he said warmly. "Your car is waiting outside. And may I say, the article about you in tomorrow's Herald is excellent. Our friend Dahlia sent an advance copy." "Thank you, Felix, for everything." As I moved toward the entrance, I noticed Rafferty near the front desk, deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. He glanced up, spotted me, and froze momentarily before nudging his companion. I didn't falter in my stride, didn't give any indication I'd seen him. Tonight wasn't about confrontation or defense. It was about claiming my place in a world I'd long admired but never felt entitled to join. The driver held the door for me, and I stepped into the warm evening air, the scent of the sea mingling with blooming jasmine from the hotel's garden. The car waited at the curb, sleek and discreet. As the driver pulled away from the Crimson Tide, I caught a glimpse of Rafferty hurrying outside, his companion following closely. Too late. I was already en route to Blackburn's, to a room full of people who would see me not as an aging mother past her prime, but as an artist with valuable contributions still to make. The reception awaited, and with it, the next chapter of a life reclaimed. Blackburn's auction house glowed with warm light, transformed from its usual austere elegance into a welcoming space filled with Port Arbel's cultural elite. Glass displays showcased selected maritime artifacts, including enlarged reproductions of the Winthrop charts I'd purchased. Along one wall, framed prints of my botanical illustrations from the Coastal Flora Encyclopedia created a visual bridge between past and present. Exactly the connection the exhibition would explore. Imogen greeted me at the entrance, resplendent in a structured black gown that emphasized her graceful posture. "Mirabelle, you look wonderful. Perfect timing. Guests are arriving, and Dr. Wilford is eager to make the formal announcement." I followed her into the main gallery, where perhaps 50 people were already mingling, champagne flutes in hand. I recognized faces from the auction, the museum board, local business owners, and, to my surprise, several academics from the university in Westholme, where I'd occasionally lectured on botanical illustration years ago. Dr. Wilford approached, beaming, a distinguished woman in her 60s at his side. "Mirabelle, may I introduce Dr. Eleanor Voss, our museum director? She's come specifically to meet you and discuss the exhibition potential." "Ms. Thornwick," Dr. Voss said warmly, "I've admired your botanical work for years. When Harrison told me about the Winthrop acquisition and your proposed collaboration, I knew we had an extraordinary opportunity. The historical and scientific significance is considerable." We discussed exhibition possibilities, the time frame, the thematic approach, the educational components. Dr. Voss's enthusiasm was genuine and infectious, her respect for my expertise evident in how carefully she listened to my ideas. Our conversation attracted others, museum patrons, fellow artists, collectors curious about the Winthrop charts. Each introduction, each discussion of my work and the upcoming project further solidified my position within this community of art appreciators and cultural stewards. "You must see the preliminary exhibition layout," Dr. Wilford said, guiding me toward a display board, where architectural renderings showed how the museum planned to integrate my new illustrations with the historical materials. As I examined the thoughtful design, murmurs from the entrance caught my attention. I glanced up to see Jessalyn and Rafferty standing in the doorway, Octavia Harcourt between them. They were dressed formally, but looked uncomfortable, out of place among the relaxed cultural crowd. Imogen appeared instantaneously at my side. "Uninvited guests," she whispered. "Would you like me to have security escort them out?" I considered it briefly, but shook my head. "No, let them stay. But perhaps keep someone nearby." "Of course. Lawrence is already on alert." I returned my attention to Dr. Wilford, deliberately focusing on our conversation rather than acknowledging the new arrivals. Let them see me here, engaged and respected, discussing a significant professional project. Let them witness what they had tried to dismiss. Dr. Voss was describing potential funding for the exhibition when Jesselyn approached, her smile tight and artificial. "Mother, what a lovely surprise finding you here." I turned calmly. "Jesselyn, I wasn't aware you had an interest in maritime history or botanical illustration. When we heard about the event, we couldn't possibly miss it," she replied with false brightness. "After all, it's not every day my mother announces an exhibition." Dr. Wilford and Dr. Voss exchanged glances, clearly sensing the tension beneath. The polite veneer. "You must be very proud of your mother's accomplishments," Dr. Voss said diplomatically. "Her work has been instrumental in documenting our region's changing ecosystems." Jesselyn's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. Though I must admit, this sudden return to professional life has taken us all by surprise. Mother has been rather unpredictable lately." "On the contrary," Dr. Wilford interjected smoothly, "Ms. Thornwick has demonstrated remarkable clarity and vision for this project. We've been trying to secure her involvement for years." This was a gentle exaggeration. They'd only learned of my connection to the illustrations recently, but his support was clear and much appreciated. "How interesting," Jesselyn said, her tone sharpening. She never mentioned any museum interest at home. In fact, she seemed quite content with retirement until very recently. I could see her strategy forming, planting seeds of doubt about my consistency, suggesting this was all a sudden, erratic change rather than a natural evolution. "Artists rarely retire in the conventional sense," Dr. Voss observed. "They simply move between periods of public output and private development. Isn't that right, Mirabelle?" "Exactly," I agreed. "And having the opportunity to connect my work with Captain Winthrop's historical documentation is particularly meaningful. The continuity across centuries fascinates me." As I spoke, Imogen gently tapped her glass, calling for attention. The room quieted as she moved to the center of the gallery. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this special announcement. Blackburns is honored to host this collaboration between the Maritime Museum and one of Port Arbel's most distinguished artists, Mirabelle Thornwick." A warm round of applause followed, and I felt Jesselyn stiffen beside me. "As many of you know," Imogen continued, "Mirabelle recently acquired the renowned Winthrop coastal charts at our maritime auction. Rather than keeping these historical treasures private, she has arranged to loan them to the museum as part of an unprecedented exhibition that will pair Captain Winthrop's 19th-century observations with Mirabelle's contemporary botanical illustrations, documenting how our coastal ecosystems have evolved over 2 centuries. More applause, accompanied by appreciative murmurs. I caught sight of Rafferty whispering urgently to Octavia across the room, his expression calculating. Dr. Wilford stepped forward to elaborate on the exhibition plans, describing the scientific and historical significance of the project. He spoke of my work with genuine admiration, highlighting publications and institutions that had featured my illustrations over the decades. "Many of you may not realize," he added, "that Mirabelle's botanical renderings are in the permanent collections of natural history museums across the country. Her eye for detail and scientific accuracy, combined with remarkable artistic sensitivity, make her the perfect collaborator for this exhibition." I hadn't known my work had reached quite that level of recognition, and the revelation warmed me deeply. All those years of painstaking observation and documentation, often completed in the stolen hours between Jesselyn's activities and household responsibilities, had built a body of work that stood on its own merits. When Dr. Wilford finished, he invited me to say a few words. I moved to the center of the room, feeling surprisingly calm despite the public setting and Jesselyn's watchful eyes. "Thank you all for your kind welcome and support. The maritime history of Port Arbel has always been intertwined with its natural environment. Captain Winthrop understood this connection. That's why his charts include such detailed observations of coastal plants and tidal patterns. In my own work, I've tried to continue that tradition of careful observation, documenting how our shoreline ecosystems adapt and evolve. I paused, gathering my thoughts. This exhibition represents an opportunity to create dialogue between past and present, to understand environmental changes through both historical and contemporary lenses. I'm deeply grateful to the Maritime Museum for their vision in bringing these perspectives together, and to all of you for your interest and encouragement. The response was enthusiastic: applause, raised glasses, warm smiles. As I stepped back, Dr. Voss approached with another distinguished-looking woman I didn't recognize. Mirabelle, may I introduce Professor Harriet Montgomery from Westholme University's Environmental Sciences Department. She's very interested in the educational potential of our exhibition. Ms. Thornwick, Professor Montgomery said eagerly, your work on coastal wetland species was instrumental in our development of conservation protocols. We've used your illustrations in our field guides for years. Would you consider allowing us to develop curriculum materials to accompany the exhibition? Perhaps even guest lecturing for our advanced students? Before I could respond, Rafferty materialized beside us, Octavia hovering nearby. I'm afraid my mother-in-law's schedule may be rather constrained in the coming months, he said smoothly. Family obligations, health considerations. You understand. Professor Montgomery looked confused. Oh, I wasn't suggesting an immediate commitment. The exhibition timeline would allow plenty of flexibility. Even so, Rafferty persisted, at her age, with her recent episodes, we're encouraging her to limit stressful engagements. I felt a flash of fury at his presumption, at the deliberate attempt to undermine me in front of a potential professional connection. Rafferty, I said calmly but firmly, I don't recall appointing you as my scheduling assistant or medical consultant. Professor Montgomery, I would be delighted to discuss educational components for the exhibition. Perhaps we could meet next week to explore possibilities? Professor Montgomery nodded enthusiastically, though her eyes darted uncertainly between us, aware of the undercurrents. That would be wonderful. I'll coordinate with Dr. Wilford for the details. As she moved away, Rafferty leaned closer, his voice low and tense. What do you think you're doing? Committing to projects, planning exhibitions, purchasing property, all without consulting family? This isn't like you, Mirabelle. On the contrary, I replied quietly. This is exactly like me. You simply never bothered to notice. His eyes narrowed. Jessalyn is worried sick about you. These impulsive decisions, this reckless spending, it's not rational behavior. Purchasing historically significant artifacts that align with my professional interests is hardly reckless, I pointed out. Neither is accepting a museum exhibition or buying a home that suits my needs. What would be irrational would be allowing you and Jessalyn to continue controlling my life and resources. Octavia stepped closer, her voice honeyed with false concern. Mirabelle, dear, we're only thinking of your well-being. Sudden wealth can be disorienting, especially at your age. There are so many people who might try to take advantage. Yes, I interrupted. I've noticed that. Her mouth tightened briefly before she recovered her solicitous expression. The stress of these new commitments, the public scrutiny, it can't be good for you. Dr. Harmon mentioned how worried he is about the potential strain on your heart. The mention of Dr. Harmon, who had never examined me, never even met me, confirmed my suspicions about their coordinated efforts. How thoughtful of Dr. Harmon to diagnose heart conditions without an examination, I remarked. My actual physician, Dr. Mills, finds me in excellent health. But then she's only been treating me for 15 years, so what would she know? Rafferty's face darkened at my sarcasm. This attitude isn't helping anyone, Mirabelle. We're trying to protect you. From what exactly? I asked. Financial independence? Professional recognition? The ability to make my own decisions? Before he could respond, there was a commotion near the entrance. A tall man with silver hair and an expensive camera was attempting to enter, only to be blocked by Blackburn's security. Press, Lawrence murmured as he passed behind me. Not on the approved list. We'll handle it. But Jessalyn had spotted the disturbance and was already moving toward the door, Octavia close behind. I caught fragments of their conversation with the security staff, family concerns, erratic behavior, medical issues. They were trying to create a scene to transform this elegant reception into tabloid fodder that would support their narrative about my supposed instability. Imogen appeared at my side. This is getting unpleasant. Would you like to withdraw to my office until we resolve it? I considered the offer but shook my head. Retreating would only reinforce the image they were trying to create, of someone fragile, someone who needed protection and management. No, thank you. But perhaps it's time for the formal toast? That might refocus attention. Imogen nodded, understanding my strategy. Moments later, she was calling for attention again, this time introducing Dr. Voss for the official toast to the exhibition partnership. As glasses were raised and cameras flashed, the approved press photographer capturing the moment, I stood confidently between Dr. Wilford and Professor Montgomery, the very picture of professional collaboration and mutual respect. Across the room, I could see Jessalyn's frustration, her plans for disruption thwarted by the structured formality of the event. The persistent reporter had been firmly but politely escorted outside, and the reception was back on track, the energy positive and focused on the exhibition. After the toast, guests resumed their conversations, many approaching to congratulate me or express interest in the project. Each interaction further cemented my position within this community, further established my competence and vision. I was deep in conversation with a maritime historian when I became aware of Jessalyn standing nearby, watching intently. When our discussion concluded, she approached, her expression unreadable. "You've planned this all very carefully, haven't you?" she said quietly. "The exhibition?" "Yes, Dr. Wilford and I have given it considerable thought." "Not the exhibition. This whole performance, the strategic purchases, the public appearances, the professional connections, all designed to establish your independence and stability before we could raise legitimate concerns." I met her gaze steadily. "If by legitimate concerns you mean attempts to control my assets and decisions, then yes, I've been strategic. But not in the way you imagine. I'm simply reclaiming aspects of my life that I set aside for too long." Something flickered in her eyes, frustration certainly, but perhaps also a reluctant recognition. "You never showed this side of yourself at home," she said, almost accusingly. "All these people talking about your work, your talents, we never saw any of that." "You never asked," I replied simply. "You were too busy focusing on what I could provide, not who I was." She flinched slightly. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my illustrations, Jessalyn? When was the last time you showed any interest in my work or my thoughts beyond how they might serve your needs?" She had no answer, and for a moment, I glimpsed something like shame in her expression before the defensive mask returned. "This new version of you, the assertive artist, the sophisticated collector, it doesn't change anything. The money has just revealed who you really are." "No," I corrected her gently. "It's revealed who I've always been, beneath the accommodations and compromises I made for family harmony. The woman you're seeing now is the same one who raised you, who supported your dreams, who put her own aspirations on hold countless times. The only difference is that I'm no longer minimizing myself to make others comfortable." Rafferty appeared at Jessalyn's elbow, his expression tight with barely controlled anger. "We're leaving," he muttered. This whole event is a setup. Jessalyn hesitated, something unresolved in her face as she looked at me. This isn't over, Mother. It could be, I offered quietly. It could be the beginning of something different between us, if you were willing to see me as I am, not as you've needed me to be. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a flicker of consideration in her eyes. Then Rafferty's hand closed around her arm, and the moment passed. Let's go, he insisted. We're wasting our time here. As they left, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the confrontation had remained relatively contained, sadness at the widening gulf between us, but also a growing certainty that I was finally on the right path. The remainder of the reception flowed smoothly, the conversation stimulating, the connections genuine. By the time the last guest departed, I felt both exhausted and exhilarated, the good tired that comes from meaningful engagement rather than the depleted. Exhaustion of managing others' demands. A tremendous success, Imogen declared as we sat in her office afterward, enjoying a quiet moment with Dr. Wilford and Dr. Voss. The exhibition has already generated significant interest. Several patrons approached me about supporting the educational components. The university is equally enthusiastic, Professor Montgomery added. She had joined us for this post-event discussion at Dr. Voss's invitation. Our environmental science students would benefit immensely from seeing how historical documentation can inform contemporary conservation efforts. As they discussed next steps and timelines, I found myself imagining the work ahead, the careful observation required, the translation of natural forms into precise illustrations, the conversation with Winthrop's charts across centuries. It would be challenging, certainly, but in the most stimulating way. Mirabelle, Dr. Voss said, interrupting my thoughts, we haven't discussed compensation for your new illustrations. The museum would like to commission them formally. Would you be comfortable with an initial arrangement of $85,000 for the complete series? The figure startled me. It was more than I'd earned from illustration work in the past 5 years combined. With the lottery winnings, I didn't need the money, but the professional recognition the commission represented meant a great deal. That seems very generous, I said carefully. Not at all, Dr. Voss assured me. It's commensurate with work of your caliber and reputation. We value your expertise and artistic vision, and we want to compensate you appropriately. After the reception, Lawrence insisted on escorting me to the waiting car, vigilant for any potential confrontation. But the street outside Blackburn's was quiet, the evening fog rolling in from the harbor, softening the edges of buildings and streetlights. Thank you for your assistance tonight, I told him as we reached the car. I appreciate your discretion. He nodded, professional but with a hint of genuine concern. It's no problem, Ms. Thornwick. If I may say so, you handled yourself admirably. Some family situations can be challenging. Back at the hotel, I found a bouquet of coastal wildflowers waiting in my suite, a thoughtful gesture from Imogen, with a note expressing appreciation for the successful event. I arranged them in a vase by the window, where the morning light would catch them. Despite the emotional complexity of the evening, I felt strangely peaceful. Each public appearance, each professional connection, each demonstration of competence and clarity further secured my position. Jessalyn and Rafferty's attempts to portray me as confused or unstable were increasingly difficult to maintain in the face of the evidence I was methodically establishing. I was drifting toward sleep when my phone buzzed with a text from Valencia. Excellent event. Port Arbel Herald reporter attending. Front page feature tomorrow. Call me in the morning to discuss next steps. The following day dawned bright and clear, the harbor sparkling in the morning sunlight. I ordered breakfast in my suite and opened the newspaper that arrived with it. There I was on the front page, between Dr. Wilford and Dr. Voss, raising a tia glass to the exhibition partnership. The headline read, Local Artist Partners with Maritime Museum for Groundbreaking Exhibition. The article detailed my acquisition of the Winthrop charts, the planned exhibition, and my background as a botanical illustrator, including quotes from Dr. Voss about the significance of my work. A separate sidebar mentioned my recent lottery, win, describing it as a fortunate turn that allows Ms. Thornwick to fully pursue her artistic calling after decades balancing creative work with family responsibilities. The tone was respectful, the facts accurate, the overall impression one of positive opportunity rather than reckless change. I was still reading when Valencia called. "The article is perfect," she said without preamble. "Exactly the public positioning we need. Professional, respected, engaged in meaningful work." "It seems to have captured the spirit of the exhibition correctly," I agreed. "More importantly, it's established you as someone making thoughtful, appropriate choices, not the erratic behavior your daughter and son-in-law have been suggesting to anyone who'll listen." She paused, her tone shifting slightly. "Speaking of which, there's been a development. Your daughter attempted to access your bank accounts this morning." My heart sank. "How is that possible? She doesn't have authorization." "She claimed to have power of attorney," Valencia explained. "Presented paperwork that supposedly granted her financial oversight due to your alleged incapacity. Fortunately, the bank flagged it immediately and contacted me as your attorney of record." I felt sick at the revelation. "The documents, were they forged?" "No, that would be too risky. They were genuine legal forms, but with obvious problems. The notary seal was from someone who lost their license 2 years ago, and the medical assessment was signed by our friend Dr. Harmon, who's already on thin ice with the medical board after our complaint." "What happens now?" I asked, trying to process this escalation, this willingness to commit what amounted to fraud. "The bank has secured your accounts with additional verification protocols, and I've initiated legal proceedings for a restraining order citing attempted financial exploitation. Given the documentation the bank retained, we have a strong case." I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the newspaper sliding to the floor. I never imagined Jessalyn would go this far. "Desperation makes people cross lines they wouldn't ordinarily consider," Valencia said gently. "The eviction deadline is approaching. They've failed to establish concerns about your competence, and they've realized the lottery winnings are securely beyond their reach." What are they hoping to achieve at this point? I wondered aloud. Even if they somehow gained control of my finances, the Lottery Commission has already transferred the funds to accounts in my name. The Lighthouse Point purchase is proceeding. The museum partnership is established. "I think we're beyond rational strategy," Valencia admitted. "This feels more like a desperate last stand, trying anything, however unlikely to succeed, rather than accepting the new reality." After our call, I sat by the window, watching boats cross the harbor as I considered the implications of Jessalyn's latest action. The attempted financial fraud crossed a line from manipulative to potentially criminal. The gulf between us, already wide, now seemed unbridgeable. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Wilford. "Field trip to document coastal species next Tuesday. Weather forecast excellent. Marine biologist from university joining us." The simple professional courtesy, the assumption of my continued engagement with the project, steadied me. This was my life now. Collaborative work with colleagues who respected my expertise, a creative path reconnected after years of compromise and accommodation. I texted back my acceptance, then called Thaddeus Quinn for an update on Lighthouse Point. The paperwork was progressing smoothly, the inspections complete, the closing date set for the following week, perfectly aligned with the eviction timeline. For my former home. "Ellis and her team have started the studio renovations," Thaddeus told me. "Custom storage installed, lighting enhanced. They'll be ready for you to move in directly after closing." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I'm looking forward to settling in." "The previous owner is pleased the property is going to someone who appreciates its unique character," he added. He asked specifically about your plans for the studio space. When I mentioned your botanical work, he was delighted, said the northern light was perfect for detailed art. These positive interactions, these forward movements, helped balance the dark knowledge of Jesselyn's desperate maneuver. I couldn't control her actions or choices, but I could continue building my own path with integrity and purpose. Later, that day, I visited the Maritime Museum to review preliminary exhibition layouts with Dr. Wilford. The work focused my mind. The practical considerations of display, lighting, and textual interpretation requiring careful attention to detail. "We've allocated this central space for your new illustrations," Dr. Wilford explained, showing me architectural renderings. "The Winthrop charts will be displayed opposite, creating a visual dialogue. Visitors will move between past and present, observing how the coastal ecosystem has evolved." As we discussed technical aspects of the exhibition, I found myself grateful for the decades of experience I could now bring to bear: knowledge of paper conservation, lighting requirements for pigment preservation, optimal viewing angles for detailed work. All the professional expertise I'd accumulated but rarely had opportunity to apply was suddenly valuable and appreciated. That evening, returning to the hotel, I was surprised to find Jesselyn waiting in the lobby. She sat alone on a velvet sofa, her posture rigid, her expression inscrutable. When she saw me, she stood abruptly. "We need to talk," she said without greeting. I glanced toward Felix at the concierge desk, who nodded slightly, indicating security, was aware of her presence. "Very well," I agreed cautiously. "The restaurant has private dining rooms." She followed me silently to a small, elegant space at the rear of the hotel restaurant. A waiter appeared immediately to take drink orders. Tea for me, nothing for Jesselyn. When we were alone, she spoke without preamble. "The bank called Rafferty about the power of attorney documents." I said nothing, waiting. "They're saying, 'It's fraud,'" she continued, her voice tight, "that we could face criminal charges." "That would be accurate," I replied evenly. "Attempting to gain control of someone's finances through misrepresentation is fraud." Her face flushed. "It wasn't like that. We were trying to protect you from yourself. You've been making these wild decisions, spending money recklessly." "Jesselyn," I interrupted quietly, "we both know that's not true. My decisions have been carefully considered and financially sound. The only thing they threaten is your access to my resources." She stared at me, something crumbling in her expression. "You really believe that? That we're just after your money?" "What else should I believe? You tried to force me into assisted living the moment I stopped financially supporting the household. You attempted to access my accounts without permission. You've spread rumors about my mental competence to anyone who would listen. These aren't the actions of people concerned about my well-being." Tears welled in her eyes, surprising me. Jesselyn rarely cried, even as a child. "You have no idea what it's been like for us. Rafferty's business collapsed, the debts are crushing us, and Thornfield is threatening his position if we can't maintain appearances. We were desperate." For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered how they'd treated me, how quickly they'd been willing to discard me when I was no longer financially useful. "I might have helped you, Jesselyn, if you'd simply asked. If you'd approached me with respect and honesty. Instead, you tried to control me, diminish me, erase me from my own life." She wiped at her tears angrily. "And now you're punishing us. The eviction, the restraining order, the public displays of your new wealth. You're enjoying watching us squirm." "No," I said firmly. "I'm protecting myself and building a life that honors my needs and interests. That's not punishment. It's healthy boundaries." "Boundaries," she repeated bitterly. The new favorite word for selfish behavior. I studied her face, the daughter I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for. How had we arrived at this place of such profound misunderstanding? "Jesselyn, do you remember when you were 8 and you became fascinated with the tide pools at North Point? How you collected shells and seaweed and wanted to know the name of every creature?" She looked confused by the change of subject, but nodded reluctantly. I took you to the library and helped you find field guides. I taught you to sketch what you observed so you could identify species later. I encouraged your curiosity, your exploration. I never once told you it was selfish to pursue your interests. That was different. I was a child. And I'm a human being with my own interests and needs, regardless of my age, I pointed out. The only difference is that for decades, I set those needs aside to facilitate yours. Now that I'm reclaiming them, you call it selfishness. She had no immediate response to that, and we sat in uncomfortable silence until the waiter returned with my tea. After he departed, Jessalyn spoke again, her voice smaller. What happens now? With the bank situation? That depends on you and Rafferty, I said honestly. Valencia has filed for the restraining order, but criminal charges are a separate matter. If you agree to cease all attempts to access my finances or interfere with my affairs, I'm willing to ask her not to pursue fraud charges. Relief flooded her face. You would do that? Yes, on one condition. What condition? She asked warily. I met her gaze directly. Tell me the truth, Jessalyn. Did you ever find my original illustrations? The ones Rafferty took to storage? She hesitated, something flickering in her eyes. I don't know what happened to them. Rafferty handled that. That's not an answer, I said quietly. Those illustrations represent decades of my work. They're irreplaceable and valuable, both personally and professionally. She looked away. Rafferty said they were just plant drawings, that no one would miss them. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What did he do, Jessalyn? I don't know for certain, she admitted, still not meeting my eyes. He said he'd found a buyer, someone who wouldn't ask questions about provenance. I assumed he meant he'd sell them eventually, if things got worse financially. My hands tightened around my teacup. Those illustrations weren't just art. They were my life's work, my legacy, my contribution to scientific and botanical knowledge. The thought of them being sold underground, without attribution or context, was physically painful. I want them back, I said, my voice steady despite my distress. All of them. That's my condition for not pursuing fraud charges. Recover my illustrations and return them, undamaged and complete. Jessalyn looked genuinely alarmed now. I don't know if that's possible. Rafferty handles all the financial arrangements. He doesn't tell me details. Then I suggest you start asking questions, I replied, because Valencia will be proceeding with the fraud complaint unless every illustration is returned. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're impossible. Even when you're offering mercy, it comes with impossible demands. I remained seated, looking up at her calmly. It's not impossible to return what was wrongfully taken. It's basic decency. You care more about those drawings than about your own daughter, she accused, voice rising. No, Jessalyn, I care about integrity and respect, which seem to be concepts you and Rafferty struggle to understand. She turned and stormed out, leaving me alone with my cooling tea and the heavy knowledge that my original illustrations, hundreds of hours of detailed observation and rendering, might be lost forever, sacrificed to Rafferty's desperate financial schemes. I called Valencia immediately, updating her on the conversation and the disturbing revelation about my artwork. This changes things, she said grimly. Taking your personal property and selling it without permission is theft. We can add that to the complaint. I want the illustrations back more than I want legal satisfaction, I admitted. They represent decades of work. I understand, Valencia assured me. I'll have my investigator prioritize locating them. In the meantime, the restraining order proceeding continues, and we'll use the threat of additional charges as leverage. After we hung up, I sat by the hotel window, watching darkness fall over the harbor. The lighthouse beam swept regularly, across the water, steady and reliable. In a week, I would be closing on Lighthouse Point, beginning a new chapter in a space designed for creativity and peace. But a piece of my past, my artistic legacy, was in jeopardy, scattered to unknown buyers by a desperate man who saw only monetary value in work that carried the imprint of my soul. The knowledge settled like a stone in my heart, a weight that even my newfound freedom and purpose couldn't fully lift. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.